Stream Team, welcome to another episode of Balls Deep. I am honored to have a very special guest today, Dr. Brian Hooper. Dr. Hooper is a clinical pastoral therapist. He received his Master of Divinity in Applied Theology at Concordia Seminary. He then went on to receive his Master of Science and Doctor of Psychology from California Coast University. He's an ordained Lutheran pastor, and he's also a fellow of Integrative Psychiatry Institute, and I consider him a good friend, a mentor, and my therapist. So, Brian, welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, Joe.
Yeah,
Honored.
Absolutely. You know, we are all about optimizing performance for our patients and giving them practical tips. And I think something, especially in the traditional medical side of things, we forget is probably the most important part, which is that lumpy gray matter in between our ears called a brain.
That's right.
And the power that has. And so I thought today we would explore probably something all of us struggle with, emotional eating, where if we look at the one thing that can undo all of our health, it's what we put in our mouth, but really it comes down to psychology.
It does.
So you ready to dive into this?
I'm ready to dive into it.
All right, awesome. Welcome to Balls Deep, a humorous yet informative medical show with a mission of optimizing your performance in the bedroom, the bathroom, and the boardroom. I'm your host, Dr. Joe Pizzona, a board-certified urologist and CEO of Pizzona MD. We hope you enjoy. Now, let's jump right in. So, Dr. Hooper, let's go ahead and let's just start with the definition. What would you consider is emotional eating? And why do so many people struggle with this? How do our emotions play a role in what we put in our mouth every day?
Well, the first thing I want to say to that is that, having pleasure in eating is perfectly appropriate. We ought to enjoy eating. Emotional eating is when we're trying to get another need met, but in a way that's not helpful for us. So, in other words, people will sometimes seek relief of stress by eating. They may have heartbreak and they're trying to mend their broken heart, so they eat for comfort. Comfort food has its place. It's okay, but we need to know what we're doing so we don't compulsively do it.
As an Italian from New York, this hits home, right?
Right.
Because I think the Italian culture, the Jewish culture, there's lots of cultures where food is the center. It is all about what are you eating, getting together on Sunday and eating grandma's gravy. And, from my childhood, food was probably one of my happiest memories was what we were eating. My mom was a good cook. And so I think that's an important distinction, that it's okay to get pleasure from food, as you said, but it's when it's trying to mend something for you. Did I get that right?
I think that's very right. When we do it compulsively and it goes beyond an informed, thoughtful, that is full of thought, choice.
So often our food choices they're almost happenstance, right? And I think that's where our environment plays such an important role. We're not intentional about what we're going to put in our mouth. And that's why it's just so much easier to go through the Chick-fil-A drive-through. It's quick, it's easy, I'm busy, right?
Right.
And, is that emotional eating as well when we're doing things like that? Or is that more related to kind of our environment and patterns of behavior?
I think that's probably more patterns of behavior, but there is, there's an overlap and there's not a very well-defined line. If people are going through Chick-fil-A constantly or McDonald's, wherever it may be, from quality food fast to fast food of no quality, if they're doing that all the time, it may be a combination of just being overworked, disorganized, and seeking immediate relief. So that has to be teased out.
I can see how that would be a very subtle thing to tease out, because one sort of person I think of is the busy mom and housewife, right?
Right.
The woman who is always putting others in front of her own needs. And, we all know moms and women who are overwhelmed as caregivers, and they do this for their kids and they do this for their husband, and they may work or they're managing the house. And sometimes there's a psychology behind there that isn't there. They're not prioritizing their health, and of course they're doing good. So it's easy to fall to the, well, I'm just taking care of my family. How do I have time for myself? But there can be some emotional backstory to that.
There's always an emotional backstory to everything we do,
Yeah.
right? And so that could be that I'm only as worthy of your love as I have proved myself to be by the last time I served you,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so it's one thing to do the right thing because you care for these people. Uh, it's another thing to do the right thing because you're looking for them to give you your own sense of meaning and value in this world.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I imagine you could even look at it from a previous childhood experiences, right? The overweight kid who always tried to be funny to gain the attention of others,
Hmm.
who always felt left out. You know, a similar sort of archetype to a degree where it's, I'm doing this behavior to try and please others, and then the food gets tied into that.
Yeah. Very much so.
Talk to me a little bit more about, speaking of previous traumas and our childhood, how does that play a role with developing emotional eating habits?
Well, one of the things that I run into generically with so many adults that I work with in my practice is the belief that I'm not enough, I'm not good enough. So I need to find something outside of myself that I can take in that will make me enough or good enough. And what food does, because pleasure releases, the experience of pleasure is the release of dopamine, right?
Mhm.
And so we can get that pleasure, that gratification very quickly by eating. I want people to feel good about themselves, but I want them to feel good about themselves not temporarily but long term. So one of my drums that I beat all the time is the drum of self-esteem. Nobody can give anybody else self-esteem. Self-esteem is the reputation we build with ourselves. Now, if we come from a background where we had loving and accepting parents who nurtured and encouraged and provided boundaries and lovingly corrected, if we have all of that, they weren't giving us self-esteem, but they were giving us a environment conducive to us building self-esteem. So if you're in a background where you're subject to a lot of traumatic stress, then you're not in an environment that supports you building a relationship with yourself. But you can look outside to alcohol, to gambling, to porn, to food, to shopping to temporarily feel good. And one of the things that I stress with the folks that I work with is this. Um, Whatever your addiction is, it's an attempt to get a legitimate need met in a way that's not helpful. So let's look at what that legitimate need is. And 9 times out of 10, they're looking for an internal change of state. They want to feel differently inside, and that's valuable. Um, that should never be despised. That you want to feel different, Joe, is okay. Let's find a good way for you to achieve that. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, what can I do to help my patients learn how to soothe themselves? What can I do to help them learn to manage the anxiety, the stress, the depression in such a way that not only are they achieving quickly a different internal state, but then they're building their self-esteem on that because they say, oh, I didn't reach for the bottle this time. I didn't reach for the pack of cookies and devour it all at once this time. Wow, I feel good for the internal change of state, but also I feel good about that decision I just made. And now we're beginning to build one step at a time. And if you take several steps in the right direction and then you make a choice that's not optimum, then be kind to yourself and make the next best step the next time. That's how people move forward. not by beating themselves up.
This is,
And you can tell I'm passionate about this stuff.
this is obviously emotional for you, Brian.
Yeah.
And I think it's beautiful to see the degree of empathy you're able to show your patients, clients. I felt that when I've done sessions with you, and a lot of what you said resonated with me. I struggled as a kid with really low self-esteem, felt like love was conditional. And did I have a food addiction or do I don't know, but have I turned to food at times in my life as my sort of drug of choice? Absolutely. And there's a lot of healing that has to happen to uncouple that.
That's right.
Especially again, when I go back to, it was just part of my culture. It was part of sometimes my only happy memories of childhood were around food. It was all that was talked about in our house. And I think, at one point we've got to get across here, and you touched on it. Food is an addiction, and it's just as powerful as the other addictions you listed. The problem is we do have to eat every day.
Right.
We do our body needs nourishment.
Right.
And so I love, Brian, before I move to the next point, you also brought up the idea of grace. We end every podcast saying, show yourself a little bit more love and kindness. We're all works in progress. These are opportunities to grow. And that's hard when you've always turned to food as your sort of your pill or your therapy for the pain that you're feeling. And instead just getting curious and leaning in and going, I had a lot of that ice cream.
I want to talk about curiosity.
Yeah.
I have 5 pillars of spirituality that I talk about, and the second one is being thoughtful. That means full of thought, wonder, curiosity. So if people can move from judgment that's denigrating of themselves or others to curiosity, what did I just do? Why did I do that? What need was I trying to get met? That's a much more positive way of examining. And then we can examine, well, what choices do I have? I want to jump in, if you don't mind. I don't mean to take over, but
No, please,
before we go any further,
Yeah.
I want to talk about the importance of planning. So you talked about earlier, you mentioned, well, the people that go through the drive-through for fast food. The old saying, failure to plan is planning to fail. And so if you want to make choices about what you put into your body, then you have to make a really intelligent Costco run or Aldi's run or something, right? You have to plan ahead of time. So plan for foods that are good for you, but also foods that you'll enjoy. And get the stuff out of the pantry that's no good for you. Just throw it out. Get rid of it. Start over. So I would say to people, make sure that you plan well. Maybe learn how to cook. I mean, I'm amazed by how many people barely know how to boil water. But they weren't socialized with that. So it's, again, not a judgment, just saying, hey, a practical thing. Learn how to do some basic cooking. Learn how to make some sauces that are not high in carbs and not filled with sugars. Learn what are appropriate sweetener substitutes, like monk fruit, for instance, right? Much lower glycemic index, or stevia or something like that. So plan in advance, right? And another thing that's so important is beginning to experience now what I want as my future condition. I helped a woman lose 100 pounds in a year's time. The sweet thing was that at the end of the year, she asked people in her church community to bring 100 pounds of canned goods, and then they all gave that to the local food pantry.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As a way not just celebrating her, but wanting to help feed a legitimate hunger in the world. But what I did with her was I asked her to imagine, first of all, it got her to stand in her imagination naked in front of a mirror, right? And look at what she saw and say, I accept you and I love you. And then imagine that person clothed, 1 month out, after having eaten in a healthy way every day and after moving every day, I want you to imagine yourself today moving the way that woman a month from now moves. I want you to imagine yourself today being satisfied by the, I use the word discipline, but I don't mean that in a punitive way. I mean in terms of practice. Imagine yourself enjoying her personal discipline that she has. She's made some significant but not major changes. She's doing it a little bit at a time. And then the next month after she lost a few pounds, we imagine the next month out. How does that woman move? How does that woman look? How does that woman feel? So that you begin to create what I call a future memory. If when I was a kid, I was in love with BMWs. I wanted a red BMW with tan leather interior, right?
Love it.
And if you watch the commercials, then somebody was careening down the coast of California, wind sweeping through their hair. Those days are gone.
You look good with the chrome look, Brian.
Oh,
You pull it
thank
off
you,
well.
thank you. But windows down, a candy apple red BMW,
Yeah, just a beautiful classic car.
and I owned that car before I ever bought a BMW. I had the experience of that. So create a mental, emotional experience of where you want to go, how you want to move. Because I think it was our friend Dr. Wenzel says, feeling better feels better than any taste you can ever have in your mouth, right?
Yes, absolutely. I think Kate Moss had a little different way of saying it. Like, no food tasted as good as feeling skinny, back when, they were the wafer thin models of the 80s, right?
Right. So if you can combine both, how I want to
Yeah.
feel and how that, and have some food that's good for me, but I enjoy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brian, I love that you took it that direction of jumping into some actual practical tactics, and some things that jumped out to me that we always talk about are get some easy wins.
Yeah.
It's too often healthcare professionals sit down with somebody who may or may not be literate in healthful choices and lays out this program that, unless you are unemployed and a billionaire,
Right.
you don't have the means to do all this stuff.
Right.
I mean, it's exhausting. But I don't think enough people talk about what's the best alternative solution. What are some easy wins we can get today? Because everyone's going to come up with well, eating's expensive or eating healthy is expensive. No, it doesn't have to be.
Not as expensive as your medical bills, doctors.
Absolutely, right? Yeah. Talk about your future self.
Right.
I don't have time to work out. You can't afford not to work out.
That's right.
So I love that you look for those easy wins. And then you brought up a tactic that I wanted to kind of dive into in a little bit here.
Yeah.
One of which falls under the visualization sort of tactics of how do we break this cycle of imagine your future self, but your future self is healthy. What would that person put in his or her mouth?
Right.
How would that person move? How would they think of themselves when they looked in the mirror?
How do they feel inside?
Yes.
Right?
Because everybody, listen, we all want to feel good inside. There's not a human being who doesn't want to feel good inside.
Right.
The problem is we don't deal with our past traumas. We don't set up an environment like you talked about of planning a meal so we're set up for success. We all have cravings.
Right.
It's not that people who are healthy have more willpower. They have better systems.
Oh, could you say that louder for the people in the back of the room?
It's not that people who are healthy have more willpower. They have better systems.
Exactly.
And in this case, a system is, I'm going to plan my meals. I'm going to steal one of your terms. I'm going to be full of thought about what I'm going to put in my mouth this week.
Right.
Before we dive into some more of these tactics, let's back up a little bit and go back to that idea of people right now. There's a coupling that has occurred. Stress to either escape or relieve pain, and food. How does someone beyond these sort of things, let's talk about the mindset a little bit. How do we uncouple that? How do we break out of that cycle of when I feel stress, I reach for, again, we could insert the booze, the needle, the powder, or the food. How do you start with someone in that sense there?
Well, one of the first things I do is teach all of my patients mindfulness breathing. I help them learn how to soothe themselves, detach from the racing thoughts, come back into their body, experience the pleasure of just breathing and being. I work with a lot of high-powered, very successful men who are leaders in their businesses. And with these fellows, what I point out is you're really good at doing. You're not so great at being.
I love that.
Yeah. And as, the famous psychotherapist Frank Sinatra once said, doobie doobie doo, right? It needs to be pulsed back and forth. We need to be doing, but we also need to learn how to be and let that be enough. And that raises a lot of anxiety in people when they're just being, because they don't believe that they're really worthy of just existing. They have to constantly be proving their worth, and they're often proving it to themselves. Kids that grow up in environments that are particularly, where they have parents who are particularly self-absorbed, and I hate to use the word narcissism because it's so misunderstood and misused, but let me just say self-absorbed.
Mm-hmm.
Those kids are often spending their time managing their parents' and other people's impressions of themselves to survive, and they don't develop a healthy relationship with themselves because of that.
Mm-hmm.
So learning to be, to breathe, to detach from the compulsive thought. I must drink, I must eat, I must gamble, I must shop, I must porn, I must whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
To just, and find how that the breathing is in and of itself comforting and soothing. And it takes practice, and that's why we practice it in session together, because people need not just to be told about it, they need to have somebody sit there with them as they're experiencing it. So.
I think there's too many, again, health gurus, professionals who talk about meditation in this sort of glib way of, oh, you just got to meditate. It's hard. It is really challenging when your brain is racing and you are, again, a doer, to stop and focus on your breathing and have that thought come in and go, that's curious, and then let it go and get back to focusing on that
Right.
breathing.
So what we're doing with this, and not all meditation is the same, and there are various kinds of meditation, contemplation, which are appropriate for different ends.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm talking about is simply experiencing breathing, not even thinking about how I'm breathing, just being with the experience of breathing. And every time any thought comes into my head, as soon as I notice it, I detach. I come back to the experience of breathing in through my nose and longer exhale out through my mouth.
I would
Which
imagine.
does several things, as you
Yeah.
well know as a physician, right?
Yeah.
It lowers the heart rate.
Mm-hmm.
It lowers blood pressure, right?
Mm-hmm.
It tends to otherwise calm the nervous system, and it's the opposite of something that is inflammatory.
Mm-hmm.
It de-escalates the anxious, the effects of anxiety, which are inflammatory. Yeah.
People underestimate the mind-body connection, don't they, Brian?
Absolutely.
And people, that's just granola BS sort of stuff. No, there's actual physiology. And a stressed mind leads to a stressed body.
Right.
And a healthy mind can lead to a healthy body.
That's right. And they go together and they affect each other back and forth.
It's bidirectional.
It's bidirectional, right. In my year-long fellowship in integrative psychiatry, we studied gut health and how important it is to cultivate the flora of our own digestive system, right? The importance of probiotics, prebiotics, and the right combination of I call them little critters
Yes, love it.
that populate our intestinal tract, because that's where the chemicals are made,
Yes.
that our neurochemicals are made, that are released in the brain. But if we're not cultivating the health of the digestive system, we're not giving our body the advantage of making the neurochemicals that make us feel good, dopamine, serotonin, etc.
I love that you brought that up. I don't think most people appreciate the fact that most serotonin is made in your gut. Now, for
Right.
most of you out there, you're like, what's serotonin? Well, Prozac, Paxil, antidepressants, they prevent the breakdown of serotonin.
Right.
That's exactly how they work. How else could we do it? Put good food in our body.
Right. Nobody was born Prozac deficient.
Yes. That's one of the great sayings in sort of the integrative and functional medicine sort of world, that we're not deficient of list big pharma's medicine.
Right.
Instead, we're just not putting the right inputs into our body.
Right. And that's what I love about your approach. It's not, you will prescribe where it's necessary, right?
100%.
But you don't go with the route of a pill for an ill, because that's just putting your finger in the dike, so to speak. You want to strengthen the whole person. So your approach that you take is to say, what does your body need to be its healthiest version of itself? What does it need to strengthen itself? And that's my approach as well. So I love working with physicians like you and our friend Dr. Wenzel and some others that they want people to be, they're into healthcare, not sick care.
Yes.
You're into healthcare. That's what we need in this world. And that's my approach. I'm not here about blaming people's parents. I'm not here to make anybody a victim. I'm here to help people be as responsible as they can be with what they've got to work with.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you can't afford organic green beans. Well, eat the closest you can to that,
Yes.
right? And wash it well. I mean, do what you can
Yep.
to raise your healthy food intake.
That best alternative solution, right?
Right.
Again.
And that's what it's called, coping,
Yeah.
right? And all of life is about coping with whatever we're handed.
Yep. You gave sort of my speech for why we opted out of insurance.
Okay.
It's because of, it's all focused on sick care. And I find it irresponsible that in this country, our entire healthcare system is based on the pill for the ill, take a bunch of symptoms, package them up as an ICD-10 quote diagnosis, and either you get a pill or surgery or just lose some weight and out the door.
I want to say something about that really quickly, and maybe this doesn't quite apply in your world, but in my world, in the psychotherapy world, I'm really not very interested in diagnoses. They're basically shorthand to communicate, for one therapist to communicate with another, the list of symptoms a person has. But a person can have a whole bunch of symptoms that are coming from very different sources,
Yes.
right? And I don't know much about medicine, but I think that's true in the world of medicine.
Oh, 100%.
People can have various symptoms that come from different sources.
Fatigue,
So-
weight gain, depression, all of it. Is it your vitamin D levels low, or
There we
is your
go.
thyroid level low, or are you just not eating good food and not moving your body?
Or is it something that's existential that you're
Yes.
not grappling with?
Yeah.
Right? Right.
No, I think we could probably talk about this subject for a good
We
hour.
could.
Hour. So, Brian, why don't we end on this? If someone is feeling stuck with their eating habits, whether it qualifies as in their mind as emotional eating or not, what's one thing they could do today? What's one last thing we could leave our listeners with as an actionable step to say, you can, with no excuses, start doing this today?
I think that for the next week, they could put together a very simple food plan based on what they know to eat as healthy as they possibly can, And over this weekend, I don't know when your podcast airs, but we're doing it on a weekend. Over the weekend, go make your grocery store run. Figure out your menu for the week. And have a couple healthy treats in there for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a drinker, be a measured drinker. You know, a drink is 1.5 ounces of hard liquor or 5 ounces of wine, right? Or a beer, about. Be a measured drinker and drink no more than what the limit is for the day, which is 1 drink for a woman and 2 drinks for a man.
Mm-hmm.
So do that. Just set some basic boundaries today and practice that for a week and see how you feel.
I love that. It's not a subtraction, a don't do. It's instead a to do.
Right.
Everyone has some healthful foods that they do enjoy. If you fill up on those intentionally, it's a little bit harder to fit in the bad stuff. If you say, I'm going to, on Friday night, like what I did last night, I would like to have a nice glass of red wine with some steak.
Right.
So that's what I did.
Right.
Now, I didn't drink the whole rest of the week. I don't think I'll drink tonight. But I gave myself that grace because I enjoy this, and 1 drink isn't going to kill me.
And you didn't drink the whole bottle by yourself.
No. But yet there are people who are doing that.
Yes.
And I think, again, we could probably have a whole other episode about the normalization of alcohol intake in this country. And we did, but I'd love to bring you back for your thoughts on it. But Brian, this has been fantastic. If it's all right with you, I wanted to kind of summarize some main teaching points for our listeners.
I wish you would.
Wonderful.
Just the tip.
All right, Stream Team. So number 1, food isn't the primary problem. It's your unresolved emotions and your systems and habits. The good news is you can get back in control today. Number 2, when cravings hit, which they will, which is normal, ask yourself, am I really hungry? Or is there something I'm trying to escape? Is this a pain reliever? Number 3, try to uncouple food from stress relief. There are other things that we can do, such as mindfulness breathing. Some other things that we didn't really get a chance to get into. Taking a walk, journaling, call up a friend, or even better, go take a walk with a friend. Kill 2 birds with 1 stone. And lastly, pulling back on what Dr. Hooper said earlier, create a mental, emotional experience that is positive. Show some love to yourself. We are all works in progress. All of us. Anyone you look at, they have struggles or have had struggles. And the more empathy we have for others and for ourselves, that's how we're going to start making a difference here. But we've got to learn to soothe ourselves in ways that don't involve stuffing it with unhealthy food choices. Brian, did I summarize that pretty well?
Excellent.
Love it. Quick question: What's your comfort food when you're looking for something? What do you reach for or enjoy?
I reach for almond flour chocolate chip cookies that I make myself.
Ooh.
And it's an indulgence, but it's also a pretty healthy indulgence, you know?
I'm going to have to get that recipe. You gave me one for these, were they called keto bombs? It was like peanut butter and some cocoa and coconut oil. Those things were delicious, but very, very low sugar and absolutely delicious.
Simple to make. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Mine's a big bowl of pasta with a nice glass of red wine, if I'm being honest.
Okay.
But I don't have it very often. So, well, Stream Team, thank you, Brian, for being a guest on today's show. This was great. Would love to bring you back if you're open to it.
I'd love to come back again.
Awesome. And I want to hear from you guys. What's your comfort food? What do you turn to? And what did you learn from today's episode? What's one thing you can do to break that cycle between emotional eating and healthy food choices? We greatly value your input. It's always a pleasure to help you optimize your performance in the bedroom, the bathroom, and the boardroom. And once again, I can't stress this enough. Please show yourself a little bit more love and kindness and grace. We're all works in progress, and these are opportunities to grow. Thanks and have a great day.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Balls Deep. If you'd like to join our stream team of listeners, please click the subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform. For more information about our practice, Pizona MD, please visit pizonamd.com. This podcast is for informational purposes only, and the content is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice. The show does not constitute the practice of medicine. No doctor-patient relationship is formed through this podcast or any of the social media channels related to this show. The use of this information is at the user's own risk. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice from any medical condition they have, and they should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions.